Hi, hi, hi. This is a bit of a last-minute addition. You guys asked me to do it, so I thought I would do a little. I thought I'd show you some photographs to sort of make the talk more interesting. So basically, I made a film a couple of years ago called Blinded by the Light, which was directed by Gurinder Chadha, and it was about growing up in Britain in the 1980s as a working class Pakistani kid whose life is transformed by the music of Bruce Springsteen. And it was based on a memoir I'd written called Greetings from Asbury Park. And after the film came out, I had lots of people contacting me all around the world saying, how much of this story is true? How much of it did you make up? What bits are true? So I thought I'd do a talk, and I started trying to tell people the true story. So that's where the origins start. So I want to take you back. Let's see if this comes up. There we go. Can everyone see that picture? Yeah. So that is me when I was 5 years old, and it's taken in Luton. My dad had come over from Pakistan in 1963 to Britain. He's the one in the grey suit, second from the left. This was taken in 1963. And he came from a village just outside Lahore, working class, rural kind of world. And he came over to Britain because he basically wanted a better life. And he left my mum and the children back in Pakistan. And my brother and my older sister I think they were 2 years old and 6 months old. And my dad later said that the reason he left so early was because he didn't want the children to be able to talk. Because once they could talk, they would be able to say that they missed him, and he needed to get out before that happened. And so he worked in Britain in various factories and doing real manual jobs. And it was the sort of world where they used to share their house with lots of other men and eat together and cook together. And it's weird, I have no idea who these other three people are, but they kind of know my dad better than I do in that way, because I had no idea what he was up to at that time. And then in 1974, May 1974, around about now actually, about 48 years ago or whatever, this month, I came over with my siblings and my mum to Luton. And we grew up in this very industrial town, and my dad worked in a car factory, and that's my dad and my mum. And growing up in Luton at that time, we kind of lived in a bit of a Pakistani bubble. It was like all the people we knew were Pakistani, and that was the world. And my dad basically just told me, stay away from white people. They're different from us. They have different values. They might tolerate you, but they'll never be your friends. And my ambitions that they expected were pretty boring, really. I was probably going to end up living in Luton, probably doing a fairly dull job, probably having an arranged marriage. And I just never really ever wanted that. Even as a teenager, I was always someone who had different dreams. I just wanted other things. And growing up in Luton, which had been voted the crappiest town in the country, and I just had different dreams. And I think I had really 3 dreams, actually. I wanted to get out of Luton, I wanted to do an interesting job, and I wanted to marry someone who wasn't already a blood relative. And all of those things just felt completely impossible. And then in autumn 1987, I start at college, and in my first week in college, I run in to this guy. His name was Roops, and the first time I saw him, he had his turban on, and he had these headphones on, and they were sort of tucked up underneath his turban, and he was just like rocking with his eyes closed. He was wearing a denim jacket and jeans, and I said to him, "What are you listening to?" And he said, "I'm listening to Bruce Springsteen." I was like, "What are you doing listening to Bruce Springsteen? He's not, Asian kids in 1987 should not be listening to Bruce Springsteen." And he said, "Bruce Springsteen is the direct line to all that's true and meaningful in this world." And I was like, well, I was a top 40 kid. I was listening to Michael Jackson and Madonna and Prince and all that sort of stuff. And it just felt completely out of my world. So I just said, I think you're talking nonsense. But he actually had a couple of cassettes of Springsteen that he used to carry with him the whole time. And he gave one to me, and he said, listen to this tonight. You'll go to bed a boy, and you'll wake up a man. And so that night, I went home. I massaged my dad's feet like I normally did. I did all the dishes like I normally did. And then I put on a cassette, and it was the Born to Run album. And I listened to a song called Thunder Road. And the last line of Thunder Road had the lyric which said, it's a town full of losers, and I'm pulling out of here to win. It's a town full of losers, and I'm pulling out of here to win. I read that, and I heard it, and I thought, I had no idea Bruce Springsteen had been to Luton. He was like, how has this guy know so much about my life? And that's when I realized that this guy had a connection to my life, even though he was from New Jersey, even though he was white, even though he was slightly older than me. There were these weird connections. So, for example, he had his first album was called Greetings from Asbury Park, and we had grown up in Bury Park in Luton. He had signed his contract on the 9th of June, 1972, and I was born on the 9th of June, 1971. His dad was a bus driver, and I used to take the bus. So there were all these all these things that we had in common. So I started really delving into him and started listening to his albums, but not just listening to them, but printing out the lyrics and analyzing them in the evenings. I created my own Bruce Springsteen folder, which would have all these cuts and lyrics and everything. And then I went even further, because it wasn't enough to just listen to his music. I needed to try and look like him as well. And so this is the album cover of Tunnel of Love from 1987. You probably aren't even going to be able to tell the difference now, but that's my attempt at doing that. As a little aside, that was also the photograph that my dad would take to Pakistan when he was trying to marry me off. It didn't work, but that might have been because of the tie. I don't know. Anyway, so then I use his music to get out of Luton, and I end up studying in Manchester. And I go to Manchester, and in the first summer of 1990, when I get a chance, I get an offer to sell books in America. And the book selling is in California, but the first thing I want to do is go to Asbury Park. And so that's me and Roops on the Asbury Park boardwalk in New Jersey. And that's us in the Stone Pony. That's me at the Stone Pony, which is a very famous club. And that's Madame Marie. 1992, I've just graduated, and Springsteen is going to be playing at Wembley Arena. Tickets go on sale at Thursday morning. I am outside Wembley Arena on Tuesday morning with a couple of cardboard boxes that I open up to lie on to sleep for 2 nights, so I can get front row tickets for 6 nights. One of those nights was actually my graduation day, but I never told my parents, so I never ended up going to my graduation day. And you might ask, what kind of a crazy loon queues up for 2 days to get to the front of Bruce Springsteen's show? And the reason you do that is because you can then take photos like that. So that's me in the tie-dye shirt, and that's Bruce leaning over in 1992. The following year, he plays just outside Manchester. So I book myself in to the hotel where he's going to be staying. Not to stay, but just means I can hang out in the bar. And then when I know that he's going to be coming outside, I dash outside, and there's actually a queue of other fans who've also done the same thing, so I'm not as weird as you think. And then I managed to meet him for the first time. And that's back in 1993. And what I quite like about that is it's about nearly 30 years on, and my penchant for checked shirts has not changed, so that's quite good. So I do all of this, and it seems like it's a completely pointless thing, but actually what Bruce is doing is he's telling me to not waste your life. He's talking about making your life more meaningful. He's talking about following your dreams, and that's what I try and do. So I graduate. I then end up getting into journalism, and then I end up getting into The Guardian. And then in 9/11 happens, and I am supposed to be going to America on an unrelated reason to New York that same month. And I find that I'm nervous about going to New York. And the reason I'm scared of or nervous about going to New York is not because I'm worried about anybody blowing up a plane. I'm worried that people might think that I might be the one who's doing that. And I think that's a bit weird, isn't it? That it's like that's the reason. So I mention it to somebody and they say, nobody's really writing about this, the duality of feeling criminalized whilst actually feeling in love with America. So I write a piece for The Guardian about it, called The Outsider, all about that duality of wanting to love something but not feeling like you can fully accept that you can belong. And that ends up on the cover of The Guardian, and I meet the editor, and he says, well, that was a great story, what else have you got? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, why were you going to the States? And he says, I said, I was going to go to see Springsteen. He says, you were going to fly to America just to see Bruce Springsteen? I said, yeah, it's not actually as unusual as you think in my life. And he said, well, how many times have you seen him? And I said, I was round about then, it was about 100 times. And he says, well, you really need to write about this. So I wrote a piece called Confessions of a Fan, which also ran in The Guardian. And then that led me to somebody contacted me and said, we've read your pieces. Do you think there might be a book in any of this? I had never really thought about a book. And they said, well, if you could write any book, what would you write? And I said, well, I guess I'd be interested in why does somebody from a background like mine, which is so ordinary, so nondescript, so unpromising, where more people in my class and school went to prison than went to university, how did I end up getting out of that world? Because I don't think it's actually intelligence, because I think there's other people brighter than me. And I don't think it's necessarily ambition, because I don't think I'm all that ambitious. It could be luck, but why did that luck fall on me? And the more I looked back on it, the more I realized that if I hadn't discovered Bruce Springsteen, I don't think I'd be doing any of those things. And my father had not left Pakistan to come to Britain, I wouldn't be doing any of those things. So I wanted to write a book which was kind of honoring and understanding both my father and Bruce Springsteen. So I started to try and work on that. And then in 2007, the book came out. And what was quite interesting about the book was part of the reason I wrote it is that just 3 days before I was turning 24 in the summer of 1995, I'd been in Manchester and I'd got a phone call saying, come back to Luton immediately, your dad's had a heart attack. And I'd had to drive all the way down to Luton and Dunstable Hospital. And my dad, at the age of 62, had had a completely unexpected heart attack. And he died 3 days before I turned 24. And so the whole career that I'd had in journalism and everything that I had achieved had been done in his absence. And it had also meant that all the rebellion that I talked about when I was a kid, about disagreeing with him and wanting to do different things, you kind of need someone to be able to argue with. And when they're not around, it feels really imbalanced. And so I realized that in a way, my book was a conversation with my dad in his absence. And it was trying to understand and humanize him in a way that I couldn't when I was alive, when he was alive, because I was too young to kind of see him as a human being. I could only see him as a father. And so the book was sort of both honoring my dad and Bruce Springsteen. And it got published in 2007. And people would sometimes say, oh, you're going to send it to Bruce. Springsteen would love to see this book. And I was like, I just don't know what I would say to him. I mean, it's a salute of thanks to him, but it would be so weird to try and give it to him. So I never tried. And then 3 years later, in 2010, there's a premiere happening in London of a documentary that he's involved in. And word comes out that he's going to come to London to attend. So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. So I managed to get a ticket for it. And I take my book with me. And I go to the BFI in London with my book, hoping that I might run into him. And if I do run into him, I can give him the book. And I go there, and the BFI cafe is absolutely packed and thronged with journalists and fans and people going to see the film. And then out on the edge, he starts walking along, and he's wearing dark glasses and a leather jacket, and he's walking along, and he's going to come in. And I'm thinking, okay, I've just got to try and see if I can catch his eye so I can sort of wave at him or something to sort of say, I've got a book for you. But it's really hard because there are so many people, so it's hard to kind of, you get lost amongst that. But he walks in, and as I'm trying to catch his eye, he turns and notices me, and it's almost like the Red Sea parts, and everyone kind of just moves out, and he walks right up to me, and he says, I just wanted to tell you I really loved your book. And I was like, you've heard of my book? And he goes, oh, people send it to me all the time. And he goes, it's a really, really beautiful thing. And I was like, oh my God. And then I got him to, this is possibly one of my most valuable objects. That's my own book signed by Bruce Springsteen. And then this is when both of us were much younger. And after that, I was with the director, Gurinder Chadha, and she said, you know, that's a sign. If ever there was a sign, we've got to make a film out of this book. And I was like, well, that's a great idea, but how many times do people say that and it never happens, you know? The idea of getting these films made is so unlikely. So I never really did anything about it. 2 years later, it's 2012, and I'm married, and I've got a 1-year-old daughter. And I have a meeting with the editor of The Guardian. I used to meet him once every 6 months or so just to have a catch-up. And he had a meeting with me, and he says, how's it all going? I said, it's all going good. He says, how's fatherhood? I said, it's going well. He said, I've got some slightly bad news for you. I said, what's that? And he goes, we're actually going to end your contract. And this wasn't a meeting that he'd actually had scheduled to tell me this. He just dropped this in conversation. And I was like, have I done something wrong? He says, no, it's just the economics of the newspaper industry are as they are, and we just can't, we need to make some cuts. And it was like the floor fell out underneath my feet. It was so traumatizing. And I got home, and I still remember this, that my daughter, I used to pick her up from the childminder, and we used to live on the top floor of a flat. And we used to go up the steps, and we had a little thing my daughter used to say, up we go, up we go, up we go, up each step. And I picked her up, and I went in, and then I sat on the sofa, and I burst into tears because I was so scared about what the future was going to look like. Because I had a mortgage, I had this child, and the one thing that I had that was my job had just gone. And so for the next couple of weeks, I was just in such a dark place. I would wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart palpitating. It was a really dark place. And then my wife said to me, look, you can't carry on like this. This is, you're going into a really dark place here. What's going on? And I said, I'm just scared of the future. We don't come from money. We don't have a safety net. I don't have a family. I don't even have a father who can, I don't have any of the things that you might be able to rely on. There is no guarantee things will work out. And she said, well, if you didn't have those worries, what would you do? If you had the freedom to be able to make decisions free from worry, what would you do? And I said, well, the one thing I would love to do is try my hand at writing a film script, because I've written journalism and I've done that. I'd love to do that, but I've never been able to, because when I was doing newspaper journalism, I had to keep feeding that machine. And she said, you know what? Why don't we just try? Why don't you just try and follow this dream? We'll tighten our belts, we'll hold our nerve, we'll hold our breath, and if we need to, we'll just go to a simple place in a small cottage in the middle of nowhere where money isn't so much of an issue. But why don't you at least try to follow your dream? So I knew nothing about writing films, so I literally got a book out called Screenplay by Sid Field, and Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, just to learn how to write it. Started working on it, got in touch with Gurinder, worked on it for 5 years. And then it got to the point where the script was okay, was good, but the BFI said, look, there's a problem here. You ain't going to make this film about Springsteen without Springsteen's music. And the only person who can say yes to Springsteen's music is Bruce Springsteen. So I need you to now write an email directly to Bruce Springsteen requesting that he allows you to use his music. Now, Springsteen has never released his music for any film. He's released one song or something, but not like what we needed. So I sat down, opened my laptop, and I wrote this email, Dear Bruce, and I just laid out why I needed it, but I kept it short. But essentially, I was saying that I wanted to open his music up to a new generation, but I also wanted to show others how much he had changed my life. So I sent the email, silence. 2 weeks of complete silence. We go to the Hay Book Festival, and I'm in a cottage in Hay, which is on the border of England and Wales, a little stone cottage. And I'm downstairs, my wife and kids are upstairs, and they're all in bed. It's about 10:30. I get a phone call from Gorinda. I've just had a message from Bruce's people. What does it say? It's weird. All he said was, I'm all good with it. I said, what does that mean? And she says, it means we're making the film. So I was like, this rush of jubilation came over me. And the weird thing is, the first thing you would want to do is obviously run upstairs and tell your partner. The problem is, me and my wife had this massive row earlier that evening, and she was furious with me. And it was about something really daft that I think I'd put the recycling in the wrong colored bin or something minor, but she got really upset about it. And I was like, am I able to wake her up and say, can we just park this whole recycling argument, because our life's about to change? But I couldn't. So I was just jumping up and down in this cottage on my own until the next morning. And we worked on the script, we got the funding, and then the filming started in April 2018. And just before that, in March of 2018, Bruce Springsteen was playing in New York. And I was like, me and Gorinda were like, you know what? We should go to New York and get his blessing. So we went and got to see the show. And then afterwards, this random guy comes up and says, would you mind just staying in your seat? So we stayed in our seat. Then he led us through these labyrinthine corridors. Before we knew it, we were in his dressing room. He comes out, gives me a great big hug, and he says, good luck with the film. I wish you all the best. And I was like, and so that was just in Broadway, just after the Broadway thing. So the filming starts, and you were talking about the idea of, Shoba, you were talking about the idea of a biopic and the idea about how weird it is. I mean, the weirder thing is when you have your teenage life brought back, and a person who's no longer alive is brought back to life. So Kulvinder Gur was playing my late father, and the costume designer said, could you send me photographs of what your dad looked like? Could you send me photographs of his clothes and what he wore? And just to give you an idea of how they did it, that's my dad, and that's Kulvinder in the film. And it was so weird that I had to keep a distance because it felt genuinely quite spooky and uncomfortable for me. Anyway, we do the thing, we film it, and we then go to Sundance. Go to Sundance, it shows at the world premiere, January 2019, gets standing ovation, blah, blah, it all sounds quite good. I go at the after show, this woman comes up to me, she says, I loved your film, I'm gonna buy it. I took it absolutely no notice of it because I assumed that's just an opening gambit of everybody at those kind of parties. So I was like, great, and then I just, I'll have a Diet Coke, please, because I assumed she was a waitress or something. But the next day, I read that Blinded by the Light has been bought for $15 million by Warner Brothers, and the person who's bought it was Carolyn Blackwood, who was the woman I'd met. And she said to me, get ready for the greatest 6 months of your life in the preparation of this film. And she wasn't wrong. So we then go to the States. And I just want to try and, just imagine this. You come from a pretty normal town, from a normal background, and you don't really do anything that amazing with your life. It's not like I've climbed Everest or, I'm not a genius in any way. So imagine going to LA, and imagine going to Sunset Boulevard, and imagine going up to Sunset Boulevard and seeing that. It's kind of a bit crazy. And then we had the premiere in New Jersey. And we had it in Asbury Park, which is Springsteen's hometown. And everyone was like, well, Bruce, he's actually on holiday in Italy, so you can't necessarily expect him to turn up. But it's nice to be around his people. We go to the premiere. I'm doing the red carpet, flashbulb. It's like a dream come true. Suddenly, everybody forgets that I exist. And there's this flurry, and I'm like, man alive, this is supposed to be my moment. What the hell's going on? And then I look, and Springsteen has flown back from Italy to go and attend the premiere. And that's him and me and the cast and the director. Now, you might be wondering, what does a person look like when they're having the greatest day of their life? That's not the photograph. The person who looks like they're having the greatest day of their life is that. And then the final image I was just going to show you was on the last day of shooting, and there was a scene. If you've seen the film, there's a scene which takes place in a nightclub, and it's like a Bollywood kind of Bhangra nightclub scene. And then after the scene was finished, they got all the cast to come down, and they just carried the party on just for our own fun. And then somebody took this photograph, and I really like that photograph because that's basically saying, "Can you bloody believe that I actually did it?" And that's where I want to end it. Thank you. I have no idea how long that lasted, but if anyone's got any questions or anything, they can take some. I can probably just hear you.
You could hear me. So when you met Bruce for the first time, what did you say to him?
Can you sign this?
That's it. You didn't.
No, do you know what? I'm not one of these people that gets really flustered around famous people. I'm just don't get like that, and I think they kind of respect that. So I wasn't like, "Oh my God, you're my hero." I just don't do that kind of stuff. One time I gave him a book that I thought he would like. Another time, I mean, what was very cool is in 1998, he was suing someone for doing a bootleg of an album, and I was working for a news company, and the news editor said to me, "Look, this is a news story which in no world are we ever going to cover, okay? But I know you're a fan, so you can go and sit in court with him anyway." So I sat for 5 days in the High Court next to Springsteen, and we just chatted. It was great. A year later, he's playing in Manchester, and I go up to see him, and I'm just queuing up outside the hotel, which I do often, and he comes out, and he looks at me, and he says, "My courtroom companion." And he remembered a year later. So that it's quite nice. But I think the reason he likes that is because I'm not like all crazy and kind of, stalkery. I just have chats with him.
And how many concerts has it been now?
Sort of 150, something like that. Something like that, yeah. My dad used to just say, "This man's not your jaja, he's not your uncle. Why are you spending so much money on him?" But ironically, I think economically now it's come back my way.
Pretty good return on investment there.
I was curious as to how did you manage the 5 years? You said you didn't have a job, and then you started writing, and then you said it was 5 years. How do you manage?
What I was doing was basically I was funded to write the screenplay, so I was getting money along the way. I said, this is the thing, is like when you get to a certain age, I just don't do anything unless there's so I said, you can only trust that this is going to happen if I'm getting paid along the way, If it was all entirely speculative, I couldn't do it. But the people who were backing it had enough faith that they paid for it, and so that payment was staggered. And then I was doing journalism along the way, but it was just, I had something that was bigger than journalism that was also a prize that I could shoot for.
Nice, yeah. Anybody else?
Aren't you supposed to be floating in the pool?
What happened to Roops? Did he come? And what would have happened if he'd been listening to the Bangles that day or something else?
Yeah, no, we do sometimes think about that. I mean, interestingly, as I said, a lot of people are in prison from where I grew up. I think they were the ones who were listening to, the Bangles or Run DMC or whatever. But funny enough, I was talking to Roops yesterday. So we talk every day. We talk 3 times a week usually. He's an investment banker. I was telling him that he would be very much comfortable around the gang here. And I was sharing some prices of the Sargalu at the hotel and comparing it to how much it costs in Luton.
So, Fraz, the other day we were talking about identity, and I was saying that when I was in school in London, the minute you sort of emerged, you were like the Paki boy. Has any of that changed? And sort of Paki boy was used as the slur. It wasn't to acknowledge anything else. You could be anybody, but you were a Paki boy. And every time my brother and I jumped into a swimming pool, everybody jumped out. Not that we knew that it was defined racism at that point of time, but it was what it was. Has
I think
any
a lot
of that changed?
I think what's happened is that explicit, obvious, in-your-face kind of racism like that is no longer seen as acceptable or tolerated across a lot. So, that stuff just gets jumped on in schools and that thing. So I think that has massively changed. So, when I met my wife, one of the things I worried about having kids, to be honest, was I just didn't, that feeling of impotence you might get when you feel you can't protect them from the ugliness of the world, And when you just think, do I want my children to have to face things that I can't stop because that's what the world is like? And that was one of the things I was really nervous about in terms of having kids. But in fact, their world feels very, very different from that. Having said that, there is still a more subtle discrimination, and those sort of things obviously still exist. But I just feel like when the facts change, your views have to change to some extent. And so the world, I'll give you a little example which seems unrelated, but it isn't. My daughter was very much into Matilda, the musical, the Roald Dahl book musical, and she wanted to see it. And I was just like, she's also quite into singing and theatrical stuff. And I was like, I felt a bit depressed about taking her because I was like, I can't, in all honesty, ask her to follow or develop that world because she could never be Matilda. And so there was just a bit of me that felt like I don't want to take you because I can't say this will be the world you can do. The best you can probably do is be Matilda's friend or something, But anyway, she wanted to go. So I took her. Then we looked in the program and they showed the cast of the 4 girls playing Matilda, and one of them looked like Layla. And I was like, actually, the world has changed to some extent, and that does feel good. And then the other thing, we talked about identity and about when I was younger not feeling very British. And then the moment that changed that is I started thinking, and it was sometime in my 30s actually, well, everything that I have achieved, whatever I've achieved, has been as a result of mostly what white people have done. To be honest, a lot of Asian people have tried to stop me. So it was like, actually, when those things start, when you start absorbing those things, then you start having a slightly less adversarial attitude. And then you also think the things that are bad, one can do something else about. You can add something to the contribution to the conversation as well.
Look at Life of Pi, for example. It's a case in point. When I went to see it, the cast was, nobody, even 10 years ago, even after Bombay Dreams, a mainstream production like that at the West End with people of color would be looked at somewhat differently. But what was interesting is, barring the 2 Indians who were sitting behind me who said, but this is not a musical. It doesn't have music in it. And we were told it was a musical, but why are we here? But at the end, they sort of gave a standing ovation, which was amazing. So things have changed. And
yeah,
you can
and I
see
think
it.
the other thing that's changed is that, there are people who are in their 20s and 30s of, my background, who don't think that there are any limits to what they can do. And that's kind of amazing, because I still feel like there are limits just because that's the generation I was born in. But the people who are in their 20s and 30s, they literally think they can do anything, and they probably can to some extent,
And has the Asian community changed? One of the things that you said is that it was really my community that stopped. And even now, be safe, don't step out, don't do this, don't do that, get married, be conservative, go beat up on this one. Have they changed?
Depends on where you live. It's a class question. Amongst the middle classes, which are getting bigger, that's getting better and improved, etc. But there's large pockets around the country where the world hasn't really moved on. And when I go back to Luton and I go back to see my family, things aren't that different, really. I couldn't tell them I'm here. They just wouldn't really understand what that is. I remember when I told my brother I was going to write a book, it was a memoir, he just said to me, why don't you write a book about how to get into TV? That's what people really want to hear. Nobody wants to hear your story. So the idea that anyone would genuinely be interested in a story of migration, that sort of world just doesn't operate. And I'll tell you one funny story. When I was working for Channel 4 News, which was a TV news program, I was in Manchester for a story, and I was in a taxi, and the driver was Pakistani, and he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work in TV." He goes, "Oh, it's a great job. It's a great job." I said, "Yeah, no, it's good." He goes, "The great thing about working in TV, because you can do it anywhere in the country, and it'll be fine. It's a really flexible job." I said, maybe. There are certain hubs. He says, no, you can take it anywhere. I said, "Why do you say that?" And he goes, "People always need their TVs repaired."